Welcome to the first episode of the Search Session, the podcast where we will explore the ever changing world of SEO. I'm your host, Gianluca Fiorelli, an international SEO consultant. I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey. Each episode will feature conversation with industry leaders, and we will explore how companies can address the challenges posed by the evolving search landscape. Our goal is simple. We want to equip in-house SEO agency professional and consultant with the essential insights and practical strategy and tactics needed to stay ahead of the curve. So get ready, learn, explore, and transform the way you think about search with us. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell to receive updates of new episodes. Okay, without further ado, let's start the first episode of a search session. Our very first guest is Andrea Volpini, CEO of WordLift. Andrea has been transforming how we understand and leverage web content, and he's one of the most vocal SEO professionals in educating the industry about semantic search and the rise of AI. In this episode, we will explore all these topics and let's see where the conversation is going to bring us. So, welcome, Andrea. Happy to have you as the first guest of the search session.
Yeah, super honored to be the first to discuss with you what the future holds for us.
Let's talk a little bit, just a few seconds about you and WordLift. You are not the classic US entrepreneur or coming from the Great Britain or the Nordic countries. You are an Italian like me. You are in Rome, maybe more known for its antics. How did you, with your partners, came out with this idea, quite prophetic, because I know you for many years, and for many years you are talking about semantics and then all these things related to what is now AI. How did you come out with this idea and this vision for WordLift?
Yeah, let me try to explain it in a few steps. I started a long time ago, like in 1995, approaching the web and building the web. And so my first companies were about content management systems and creating platforms for helping people publishing content online. And as we progress, I started to feel the issue of organizing and architecting information, like information architecture, accessibility. These became core topics because at that time, in the early 2000, I started to work with the Italian parliament. So we had to deal with a lot of regulation and laws, and the web was still a fairly new channel for citizens to interact. Open data started later on as a movement for enabling people to access information and compute information. And so at that time, I started to do research work on the semantic web and how this could be applied to content management systems. So this is really how it started. So very far from SEO, but more grounded into information architecture and publishing systems.
Cool, cool. And from there, you did a long travel and landing in the SEO world.
Yeah, yeah. And it was unexpected, to be honest. Like many startup, you don't have a market fit. And so WordLift started as a research project in 2015, maybe. And then it became a company in 2017. And we started with this idea of enabling people to publish data because we were very much aware of the importance of feeding autonomous agents. Now, let me make a step backward. 25 years ago, the guy that invented the web, Tim Berners-Lee, along with a couple of other friends, started to question about how we could make information easy to be computed by autonomous agents. This was 25 years ago. And a very famous and debated article came out of Scientific American that introduced the concept of semantic web. Now, semantic web was all about making information accessible to machines. and introduced the notion of describing the content in a machine-readable, friendly way, and the idea of autonomous agent. Now, for many years, we didn't have other than the first. And so the focus was really on structuring content and adding metadata. But now, in the last 2-3 years, as large language model entered the scene of natural language processing, we also to really have a feeling of what an autonomous agent can be, and how beautifully we can blend structured data with some agency by AI. So this is really my journey, and how at some point I realized that the search engine needed this data for training their systems. And so that's how we pivot to what it used to be an editor for helping people creating these linked open data into an SEO tool. And I still remain, I think, I perceive that our approach still remain somehow on the edge of the SEO industry. There is a lot of contamination from different industries as well in the work that we do. Sometimes more and more, we are approached now by product teams rather than SEO teams, because they want to use the technology that we use for their platforms or their systems. And so yeah, we're in an interesting place, I think.
Cool. And so let's say that WordLift start is feed around 2015, then 2017. It seems just a few years ago, but actually a lot of things change
Oh, yeah.
between, yeah. And for instance, in 2017, nobody was thinking about AI apart what we were saying. Okay, Google is starting to use machine learning for crafting the algorithm and so on. That was what we were talking about. The closest thing to what we can consider AI in search. But now all of a sudden, in just, I think it's 3 years now already, that everything like LLMs and then LLMs plus RAG and now Agentic Search are becoming the word of mouth of everybody. Not only the most visionary, let's say, or the people who is more strategic and used to look very forward in the industry, but also in everybody work, in even the small business SEO or the small business company already start to see AI involved in everything that they do. And the latest iteration that is coming into my mind is quite popular now. It's a buzzword. It's becoming a sort of buzzword, which is agentic, the agents, agentic search, or something like this. And you are quite vocal in this sense, also with test and experimentation. And you said once that we, as professionals, we should start thinking that our the person that the person between brackets, the person that we are going to talk with now is not really our first audience. Obviously, is going to be our potential customer, our potential user, but always with the interface of a machine, in this case, the agent. So we should talk and create things, think considering this filter, these agents that then are the ones communicating our content, our service, our brand, ultimately, to the potential customer. This is not something different what I was saying, or me too in the past, when I was saying SEO always talk about the audience, which is perfect, but we have to think that we talk to the audience through a medium, which is Google. So in that time, it was, okay, start looking at the search because Google is suggesting us what he thinks its user, which are also our user, may search. So in this perspective, so that we are going to deal with this middleman between us and the user, how do you think are the most challenging, biggest challenges that companies from one side and the professional like us, SEO, who are helping the companies to be visible and reach their users, are going to deal with? So what are these challenges if it's easy to understand how we are, what are
Well, but we have to look at different layers, right? And we have to tap into the know-how that SEO has of how information extraction works. This remains foundational, and there are a few key elements to keep in mind and to consider. First, we want to make sure that the information is delivered in the most efficient and fastest way. This is because, of course, AI crawler in general might work at inference time, might try to get a response back to the user by either leveraging an existing index, such as the one provided by Microsoft Bing or Google, or might even at runtime try to discover information in order to provide a response back to the user. So speed is pivotal, right? Speed was essential when dealing with humans because we have seen a lot of statistics about decreasing attention and click-through rate when the page loads it takes more than 3 seconds for a page to load. This is even more true for an agentic search engine or an agentic assistant that is looking for information on behalf of some human. And the second, so there are some technical elements to be taken into account, such as speed. The other level is, of course, the crawlability of the website. Of course, I expect to provide a clear directive indication on what can be done with my content, what content can be used for inference, and what content can be used for training, for example. We can differentiate now by looking at the bots, robots.txt, what we want our content to be used for. And so there is this layer of technical aspects that are somehow similar to how we have dealt with traditional crawlers in the past, but they're also different because AI crawlers have less sophisticated data pipeline in most cases, unless they are relying on the major commercial search engine providers. The other aspect is structure, right? How we organize information, because that's what makes a difference for an AI agent to get data back.
Um, Going back a little bit, just a second on the crawlability, is here where also this new kid in the block, the LLMs.TXT is coming. It's
Yeah.
uh, it's a way to better inform the AI bots, potentially the LLM bots, what to crawl, what to store, what to use as a search. So
Yeah.
it's also a way for, especially thinking in enterprise companies, but also small companies, to protect somehow that kind of information that we don't want to be public and generically used in a response, right?
Yes, LLMS text, it's an emerging standard. So it's nothing that it's defined with 3C specification. And it's still an ongoing protocol that can be used for facilitating the consumption of content by an AI system at inference time. So you don't use an LLMS text for indicating what the models should be trained on. You use an LLMS text to indicate briefly what content is available on your site. It originally started for providing a compact indication on technical documentation websites. And so it started within the area of tools like fast APIs and other Python set technologies that wanted to make their own documentation accessible. But then it became broader in its usage. And an LLMS text differs from a traditional sitemap because it indicates uh, a list of URLs that might be on your site, but also might be on your documentation website. So you have one file that would comprise URLs from the main website as well as URLs from the documentation website. These URLs are described using Markdown. Markdown is a way of formatting text. It's used for training this language model, and therefore it's used also is new standard to facilitate the consumption of content. And an LLMS text shall be provided into the root folder of your website. And I can see that now it's daily crawled by, for example, GPT bot, among others. It's currently getting a good adoption. You find Perplexity that is using LLMS text on its own property. You find Anthropic that is using LLMS text on its own petition websites, Agent Face, and many others. So its adoption is increasing. I developed a free tool that anyone can use for kind of getting started with that. But yes, it's
The need of standards, as always in an emerging, I don't want to call it industry because it's in an evolution of the industry and the introduction of new elements in this industry. The problem is always how to decide standards. And in this sense, standardization always has been a chronic issue of SEO. And we know each tool, let's say SERP features. One tool is calling them SERP feature. One tool is calling search features. One tool is presenting them as a long list features that you then need to reorder, and nobody is calling this feature the same way. Or so many things that make sometimes the connection between the information you own, your proprietary information from Search Console, analytics, whatever, and information from tool is always a big time to work. In this sense, let's go to a very interesting topic that you share and with the industry, not so far away. It was last year. It's the concept of SEO ontology. And surely the SEO ontology is the concept of giving a proper ontology to everything, to the SEO domain name. Below this, creating all the standardization of a definition of everything we say in SEO. And it's fun because we know that it depends is a classic meme of SEOs. How can SEO ontology, please be free to explain it better than I did, can be finally find a, a mainstream adoption? Because the problem when it comes to standards is if it just between a small group of people, it's not going to be a standard at all.
Yeah, I've been a strong advocate of standardization, of course, given the work that we've been doing on the shoulder of B3C and first, and then schema.org after. Schema.org is a standard that helps search engine understand the meaning of web pages. And it became a standard as soon as there was commercial interest by the big modern search engine at that time. So Google, Yandex, being to sit around a table and to agree on definition of a vocabulary that they could describe the web pages and the content of these web pages. So SEOntology is designed as an extension of schema and that has the goal of describing concepts that are relevant in SEO. And this will become more relevant as agentic AI becomes a predominant way of doing the work, right? In 2023, we introduced the first SEO agent. So an agent that, for example, can create your authorship markup for your site, or an agent that has a graph retrieval augmented generation tools for helping you revamp existing content or doing different type of tasks. Now, in order for these systems to operate meaningfully and possibly interoperate, we need to define a standard, much as search engine define a standard in 2011 with Schema among the SEO tools in order to be able to exchange data points from one agentic workflow to another agentic workflow. And so this is one of the core aspects of SEO ontology. We are making some good progress. Hopefully we will share more with the community in the next few months on the next version of SEO ontology. I haven't pushed much on the interoperable part yet. And the reason is that we're testing as we design the model, and everything in SEO ontology is designed to be used by an agent. So what is this idea? In the end, language models are stateless, right? They are trained and their weights are freeze. And then we interact with these prediction tools that would give us an answer based on a predefined set of weights. In order to evolve an AI system such as design around the language model, we need to provide it with a memory. And so when we look at the human brains, the memory, there are course, different theories that you can look at, but I really focused on what is called the thousand brains theory. And in the thousand brain theories, the memory is described as vertical columns that grasp a representation of, let's say, an object like the glass. And there are multiple columns that are providing different representation of the same object, coming from, let's say, the sensation that you have on your fingers, and maybe the sound that your fingers make when you move around the border of the glass. And all of this information then comes into a sort of a coding mechanism where, these different columns provide a different understanding of the reality. And therefore the system then can memorize it and then make the next step. So when I started to work on SEO ontology, the primary goal was, yes, to make information interoperable in SEO, where, of course, as you mentioned, everyone has its own kind of term for describing the same thing. But it's also the most important part is to create a memory layer for an agent that needs to understand, okay, what is a trend in a keyword if I look at the data in Search Console, or how do I describe double heat, for example, what is that? And what are the things that should be taken into account if I need to increase the topical authority on a cluster of pages? So imagine SEO ontology as the language that helps us create the memory layer for agentic SEO. That's that.
Okay, so yeah, this is really a cool idea. And also because, I mean, it's substantially these memories made of, how to say it, agreed with definition of things.
Yeah.
So it's a minimum denominator about all the things that we do. This is not so hard to define. If what is hard to define is how to interpret this
Right.
definition in a conjunction. And this can be how where the agent of a SEO ontology agent can help us in finding this common tone between different interpretation. And there is another thing that in your really long post on Search Engine Journal where you were describing ontology, really, I really like it. Okay, we are talking of this, we are talking of an agent, but we also have to talk about the second player, which is us. So the human always are in, let's say, not delegating 100% of the work to the agent. It's somehow us as a professional, we are, I don't want to use the word guiding, but yes, proving or proving the right output of the agent, or guide eventually the agent in order to go into this chain of thoughts that SEO and marketing, digital marketing generally is.
Yeah.
I'm a correct in this interpretation of your.
Oh, yeah. This is a crucial aspect of symbolic AI, which is what I'm trying to focus on the most. And it's reassuring, right? It's the role of the human in designing an AI system. And one of the role of the human is, of course, on designing the language that the system needs to use, and therefore agree on a set of definition. And this is a basic foundational layer for representing knowledge. Because if you talk about primary keyword for a web page, we need to agree what is a primary keyword, and we need to define it in such a way that any agentic system would agree on the same definition. And then the second aspect, of course, as you mentioned, is okay, but once we have defined all the elements, how we do things make a difference, right? And so I want to preserve these differences while having a layer of interoperability for the main definition. For example, we use SEO ontology for building dynamic internal links on large sites. And that helps us providing the agent with a memory layer that the workflow acts on it. But it also gives us control over this workflow because we have defined the terms, and then we can define how the overall flow needs to adapt over time. And this is very customer specific in most cases because we might take into account some business metrics along with the SEO metrics. And so in general, when you look at symbolic or narrow symbolic AI, which is this blend of semantic web and autonomous agent or deep learning, if you like, you look at a space where you want the human to be in control of the workflow. And you want to be in control also on what can be agentic and what shouldn't be agentic. Because I might have some rules inside my organization that certain things can be done, certain terms can be used, certain terms shouldn't be used, and I shouldn't let the system go completely, on its own, simply because it will break these rules, because it's been trained on a vast amount of data that it's outside of my control zone. And therefore, if I want to provide more reliable output, I need to blend these two systems coming from symbolic AI and the new deep learning AI that created the language models. So that's also the idea of SEOntology. Yes.
And changing a little bit the topic, one of the milestone of the most important things that has always been central in semantic web search is our structured data. We also talk about SEOntology being, for instance, an extension of
Yeah.
structured data. However, because of this really skyrocketing progression of natural language processing and also video and image recognition, but it's a growing, let's say it's a growing number of people starting to say, now, structured data are not useful anymore. I think that because there is, let's blame Google for that structured data has always been considered for obtaining the classic rich results. So for improving the CTR of on the search result pages. But okay, I remember a few months ago a wonderful article by John Alderson saying that structural data what are now maybe they are more important as a labeling system more for everything else you were thinking about structural data before. So maybe this is the reality, always has been the reality of structured data. So using a baseline of labeling the content, the structure of a website, the nature of a page, for then now being useful also for LLMs based system. What do you think? What's your thought about, what are your thoughts about this?
Of course, I've been very much involved in structured data. I built a company to automate structured data. At least this was one of the core focus idea when we started. I always been advocating to create structured data for your own use. And that sounded so fuzzy many years ago, right? Because what is your own use of structured data? Structured data is designed by search engine to understand the meaning of a web page. So what is the internal use that a website owner can make of its own structured data? It seems very fuzzy. But because of course I was coming from the linked data movement, it was clear that data had a lot of different use cases. And of course, the reason why search engine invested on structured data was really to build their own system and to train their system and to get fresh updated information in a structured form. Now, fast forward to 2021, when the first Transformers architecture became available in the open source world. I remember the excitement of using the first GPT models, the excitement of that Google T5 created in the industry when it was first introduced. So at this point in time, when Transformer were made available, then finally my intuition that we needed to consume structured data was no longer intuition, but it was actually something that we could prove. And so I started to work on more and more on this idea of graph retrieval augmented generation or graph-based content generation. So you had data structured, and then you can generate content unstructured using a language model. And then you can validate the content that you have created with the structure that you have in the knowledge graph. And so finally, for me, I could see the use of structured data in something very productive. because we have started to deploy it across hundreds of websites. This technique of generating content at scale and validating content at scale using the data that we had structured for the search engine in the first place. So is structured data relevant in 2025? I think it's more relevant than ever, but we have to take into account that search engine cannot really rely on structured data for understanding the meaning of a web page, or at least cannot only rely on structured data simply because the adoption of structured data is very diverse. So we failed on creating a baseline of structured data across the web. And there are sites that have highly qualified data that can help a search engine understand the meaning of a page, but there are sites that have no structured data at all. And so it is hard to think of structured data as a ranking signal. It never been a rank. At the same time, as I worked on the chapter of structured data for the Web Almanac, I had chance to work with leaders in the industry, including people working in Google. And it's clear that, for example, structured data is always used for reliably activating some search features that are by the text. For example, in large e-commerce sites, uh,
Yes.
where I thought, okay, we do have the merchant feed. Why do we need structured data? And because we built a knowledge graph with the products, and then either I can output the feed in the merchant or I can add structured data. The reason I do both is that I learned from the Googlers that these feeds in the merchant are not always up to date. Whether if I represent information that is crawlable on a web page, that information in structured data is way more updated than my feed that might come into their system and not outdated because of the processing that creates this feed. So there is a tremendous value in structured data for search engine these days still, even though it is true that of course we cannot rely on structured data only for expressing the meaning of a content. And we should have great content in any case. A clear example is Amazon. Amazon doesn't have any structured data, but it uses a product knowledge graph to create these beautifully rich design product description pages that always rank at top for most of the transactional queries.
Yeah, yes. It's, let's say, it's the structure is in the design.
Yeah,
So the consistency of a design then define the structure of the data that is used by the search engines to craft all the things that are used as a product feed, as a product, classic product PDP search results, or in the same feed. The feed for merchant is it's easier with a structure so well designed as in
yeah,
Amazon. It's so standardized
yeah,
in every aspect. And by many years, because it's didn't really evolve during the years. It was really well structured from the beginning.
yeah. Because
And that's what somehow as if the search engines were using the design, the PDP design of Amazon, as if that should be the standard. That when other websites don't have, let's see, the structured data, if it's able to give us the same kind of structured information that, for instance, Amazon or other players in the e-commerce space are able to do without structured data.
yeah.
So
So I
it's
think
also so the things of structuring the content is something that comes before even thinking of structured data, LLMs, whatever. It's a design thinking.
yeah, absolutely. And as we said in the beginning, right? What do you need to do to make a crawler or an AI crawler understand the content on your site? You need, of course, crawlability, speed, and a lot of other technical aspects. And then you need structure. Now, this structure can be represented using schema, can be represented by the quality of your LLM as text, can be represented by the richness of the information provided in your merchant feed. But the core aspect is the structure. Now, the structure is also something that you will reuse for creating better content and personalized content for your user, for your client, or your algorithmic audience. So the quality of the structure, it's pretty much independent from the representation layer. Of course, again, interoperability plays a big role. And for me, it wouldn't make sense to represent the description of the price of a product without relying on a schema attribute, simply because LLMs or crawlers know how to process and extract the price using that standardized vocabulary that schema is. And so that's pretty much why we first have to structure, and then we have to look at interoperable standard for representing the structure so that we get more visibility and more engagement by our end user.
This is a great thing about the structure. I always been, because of my past, when I was working, literally a century ago, I was working in the audiovisual world in Italy. And one of the works I did was creating this collectibles video encyclopedia about everything. And obviously, this one of the biggest work was to, when in pre-production, was how to structure the series in so to make it fit in, I don't know, 52 VHS cassette for weekly release. So I always thought in terms of structuring content, not just in terms of literal content, but also as a something else. And structure is also going back to LLMs. It's about its clarity. It's offering, especially to natural language processing system, what we want to say, what we want to communicate in a real clear and not ambiguous way. And here I want to just very briefly talk about the concept of monosemanticity. It's a really complicated word for us to pronounce, which is a concept that Anthropic proposed last year, if I'm not wrong. And that is, let's say, it's something that we should really communicate, especially to the writers and the companies, about how clear, how not ambiguous should be the content that we are creating and proposing in our websites. I think that monosemanticity is a way to say, okay, uh, we want things to be clear, so don't use this type of languages because it can be used for marketing in general, but the core content should follow these type of rules. I don't want to enter in the SEO copywriting stuff because I always believe that it doesn't exist, SEO copywriting, as I don't think it's going to exist AI copywriting optimization. But yes, I think this is an interesting remark about this need of clarity of structure also when we are creating code.
Yeah, let me tell you where I started my journey with monosemantic features. In general, because we were doing this work of generating text from data in the graph, I started to realize that when prompting the system, we were getting very much diverse response when using specific terms that we could define in some cases as name entities. Some concept seems to trigger a response that was richer than the term itself, as if some token had a more impact on this or that model. And so when I started to read about sparse autoencoder, I started to found an interesting path to follow. And so briefly, what is a sparse autoencoder? It's a transformer designed around an encoder and a decoder architecture. The encoder will take as input the activation parameters of a language model. So when a sentence is sent to a network of a language model, it works like a flipper, right? Like balls in a flipper. The parameters is a series of weight, and this weight will make the token go across a certain path and come back with the response. Now, when the token goes through these layers of the network, some of these neurons are activated. And these are the activation parameters that are used for training a sparse autoencoder. So the representation that the sparse autoencoder generates out of this activation layer, so the neurons that have been activated to given a set of tokens are then translated into an encoding space, and then they are decoded, and then the decoder will try to make them converge with the original token. And so this is how sparse out encoder works. And by doing this work, so it's a very simple network. Everyone can build a sparse out encoder, provided we have access to the activation parameters of the language model, meaning that we can do this with open source models. We cannot do it with GPT-4, for example. We can do it with GPT-2 because it's been open source. We can do it with the Gemma models from Google. We cannot do it with the models that haven't been really as open source. So why we do this process? Why do we create this additional transformer on top of a language model? We do this because we want to scan its brain. We want to activate, we want to understand what neurons are activated when there is a specific sequence of tokens. For example, a brand, right? Okay, so if I have a brand like Nike, what happens inside the brain of a language model? And typically what happens and what we can see by plugging the sparse out encoder on top of an existing language model is that we can actually read the two types of neurons. There are some neurons that are polysemantic. And because the network is billions of parameters, but of course the different meanings that the network needs to process are way more than the available parameters. A lot of nodes in the network have to represent different meanings. For example, you might have a neuron that contains a Python code instruction and then a word in Korean. And then maybe the same neurons contains the history of Rome. And this is, it's called superposition. So there are multiple meanings within the same neurons. But when I plug this sparse out encoder, I can also see that within the same language model, there are some neurons that seems to activate only when some terms or concepts are triggered. And these are the so-called monosemantic features. And so what is a monosemantic features? It's concept. And it can be represented also with an entity in Wikidata for some extent. For example, the Golden Gate in the famous Anthropic paper, it's an entity that corresponds to a monosemantic feature. And by using these monosemantic features, guess what? We can twist the way in which the language model responds. And so these monosemantic features are very interesting for understanding how a language model works, but also for controlling the output.
Yes, it's a way to avoid the classic hallucinations, essentially.
No, not necessarily. It's a way of maybe generating more hallucination. It's a way of triggering a different type of response. It is a way, of course, also to align the model. So we can use these monosemantic features to prevent the model to say things that we don't want to say after, in the post-train phase when we want to, for example, align it and say you shouldn't instruct people on how to create a tome or things like that. We can use these monosemantic features. So there are a lot of use cases really once you have detected what are features that can be used. What I'm trying to analyze is how much of these features overlap with the notion that we have of entities in large databases like Wikidata.
Okay, cool. I think it's almost 1 hour we are talking about all this stuff. And before concluding our Let's Go Personal, I'm going to present you something that are a few questions that I'm going to ask to everybody coming to a search session. It's the so-called Proust Questionnaire. It's a really simple question that you should answer really fast, almost without thinking. And that can help us, all of us, to understand better who you are. So, do you want to play this game?
I'm ready.
Okay, easy question. What is your favorite word?
Favorite word,
Yes.
semantic,
And what is your least favorite word?
um, entropy.
Oh, that's a cool word. We were talking about data, so it seems quite logical that you don't like entropy. And what's turn you on?
These days, definitely, I'm very much into the idea of agentic. I think building the right agents and not building agents that are useless and pollute the web with bad content. I think that's what turns me on.
And what's turned you off?
I think how we got here with AI, it turns me off because we got here by stealing content in a way.
Mm,
I find that as the original sin of AI, the fact that we have to, Aaron Swartz, I don't know if you remember, but Aaron Swartz
yes.
died because he was convicted of a crime by getting data out of corporate network. And then all of a sudden we had AI because of stealing way more content that the poor Aaron got on his laptop. And these original scene turned me off because yeah, there's gotta be a different way of doing what we're doing.
Oh, let's go sensorial. What sound do you love?
I'm very much into industrial techno. Yeah, something in that spectrum, I think.
Okay. And what sound do you hate?
There is a thing very classical of Rome and known. There is the sound of the cannon that originally the Pope introduced so that all the churches could be synchronized across the city. And as much as I love the story, I hate it because every time that I listen to it, it's already known for me, and I should have done more than what I actually did. So even when I have lives.
And maybe it's coming because you're Rome, some Roman word. What is your favorite course word?
Course word, oh my god, I have no idea.
If you
Yeah.
are saying something in Roman dialect, we are not going to translate it. So,
Yes. I don't know. In general, I don't like swear word and curse words. I know that now they can deactivate AI overview on Google, so I'm planted to, but nothing special in that area, I would say.
and if you weren't doing what you are doing now, what kind of job, what kind of profession would you see yourself? Or maybe when you were a kid, classic, I want to be an astronaut. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that performing arts would be my next choice.
Cool, cool. Andrea Volpini could have been one of a guest of a Cannes festival, and maybe in a alternative parallel world, I would have you interview when I was working in the movie channels in television. What would that be fun? Okay, thank you so much, Andrea Volpini, for staying with us during this hour. And thank you for all the information. Really grateful for it.
Thanks to you.
And for you, listeners and viewers, remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and see you in the next episode of the search section.